And now to federal politics, and the week dominated by proceedings at the New South Wales Independent Commission against Corruption. Scrutiny of a company where senior Liberal Senator Arthur Sinodinos was once chairman overshadowed the government's plans to cut red tape and repeal thousands of pieces of legislation. Earlier I was joined from Melbourne by the Parliamentary Secretary to the Prime Minister, Josh Frydenberg, and from Sydney by the Opposition's finance spokesman, Tony Burke. Josh Frydenberg, Tony Burke, good evening.
Good evening. Nice to be with you.
Josh Frydenberg, on Wednesday morning you were insistent that Assistant Treasurer Arthur Sinodinos should stay on, but he later stepped aside. Do you still believe he should have remained in the ministry?
Look, that was a decision for Arthur Sinodinos, and he took a unilateral decision to temporarily stand aside. Look, Emma, there's no evidence whatsoever of any wrongdoing against Arthur Sinodinos. He has said he will participate fully in the ICAC processes. I'm sure he'll be vindicated, and I look forward to him rejoining his colleagues on the front bench.
Tony Burke?
Well, our view was Arthur needed to be able to explain himself to the Senate. We expected on the Wednesday morning that at 9:30 Arthur Sinodinos would stand up and give an explanation to the Senate. Instead, he privately gave an explanation to the Prime Minister, and all of a sudden he was standing aside as a minister. So exactly what happened in that conversation with the Prime Minister, Arthur won't give the explanation to the public, and the Prime Minister won't give the answer to the Parliament.
Josh Frydenberg, it's been reported an alleged slush fund related to the Liberal Party received $183,000 from Australian Water Holdings on top of $77,000 on donations directly to the New South Wales Liberal Party. While Senator Sinodinos was chairman or deputy chairman at that time, it does sound like a very tangled web, doesn't it?
Look, he's given some explanation into the Senate on those issues on the 28th of February last year, and all these issues may come up through the ICAC processes. But like I said, Arthur Sinodinos has said he will cooperate fully with the ICAC processes. There are no evidence that is of any wrongdoing by him. I have great confidence in Arthur as a person of the highest integrity, of someone of great intelligence, common sense and decency. He has taken the decision unilaterally, Emma, to stand aside temporarily because he saw that this was a distraction for the government. We're leading into the budget. We had an important message to convey this week about the repealing of lots and lots of regulations and unnecessary legislation. This was an issue that was distracting the government, and Arthur took the decision to temporarily stand aside.
What role will Arthur Sinodinos play in drafting the budget?
Well, he will not be involved as the Assistant Treasurer. He will be involved, I suppose, as a backbencher in the normal scheme of things. But Arthur Sinodinos has played an extremely important role in the economic team of the Abbott government. He was doing some fantastic work in terms of streamlining the superannuation reforms as well as in tax reform. He will be missed, there's no doubt about that. But he is a person who I think has a lot to give to the Australian Parliament, to the Australian people. I do look forward to him coming back to high office, being back on the front bench, and Tony Abbott's comments to the Parliament during the week were that Arthur Sinodinos has shown himself to be a real team player. He has taken the unilateral decision to stand aside only temporarily while these issues play out.
Tony Burke, as Josh Frydenberg says, Arthur Sinodinos explained himself in the Senate in February of last year. Are there still questions you say he needs to answer, given he is already slated to appear before ICAC?
Well, our view was that on Wednesday he should have either provided an updated explanation, given the new evidence that had come from ICAC, or he should be stood aside.
What sorts of explanations are you seeking?
Well, I'm not going to go point by point into evidence that's now before ICAC, but there are a number of issues that came up in evidence on Monday and Tuesday, which caused people to question what Arthur Sinodinos had previously provided to the Senate. Now, I fully expected that he would stand up and give that explanation to the Parliament. We didn't start Monday saying he's got to go. We said he's got to explain. Now, something changed when he met with the Prime Minister, because it wasn't only Josh Frydenberg who'd been saying Arthur shouldn't stand aside. The Prime Minister himself had been saying it. On Wednesday, the Prime Minister did a complete backflip on that, and something was said, there was some information that must have been provided to the Prime Minister that was different, and every time we asked Tony Abbott questions on Wednesday and Thursday in Parliament about what did he know and when did he know it, he flatly refused to answer. It didn't matter what you asked, he'd just say, oh, Arthur Sinodinos is a great person. Well, the question is, what changed and what caused the Prime Minister to reverse his position that Arthur Sinodinos should remain in office?
Can I just say, yeah, nothing changed. There's no great conspiracy here that Tony Burke would love to uncover. I mean, let's be real here. The Labor Party is the party of Eddie Obeid. He is the one who's the source of all these problems.
But hold on a minute, if we speak specifically about what's happening here, Josh Frydenberg, is a company of which Eddie Obeid is said to have been a part owner, and then you've got your assistant treasurer, former assistant treasurer, now declaring that he didn't know that Eddie Obeid was a part owner, despite the fact that he was deputy chairman or chairman. I mean, there are some questions that perhaps might be puzzling to the public.
Well, like all these issues will be discussed through the ICAC processes, and Arthur has said that he will participate in them. But, you know, it's a bit rich for Tony Burke to come on this show and pretend that the Labor Party's got clean hands, because Greg Combet was fronted before the ICAC to give evidence into his relationship with a union leader who had come into question. Tony Burke himself had made 2 trips to Eddie Obeid's Perisher ski lodge, Stephen Conroy as well. You know, I think we've got to be very careful here not to be judge and jury. There is a proper process in place. There are legal privileges. There are legal issues to be resolved. Arthur Sinodinos has no evidence whatsoever of any wrongdoing against him. Let it all play out. There is no grand conspiracy involving the Prime Minister. As the Prime Minister said, Arthur's taken one for the team and has temporarily stood aside.
Joshua, just on what you've just gone through, because all we said was that Arthur should provide an explanation. Now, you've just given examples of 3 members of the Labor Party, all of whom, when the same point was put to them, gave public explanations and everyone agreed they'd done nothing wrong. That opportunity was there for Arthur Sinodinos on Wednesday. I don't know what was said to the Prime Minister, but I don't think it's unreasonable for us to simply ask the question, what was the Prime Minister told? What did he know? When did he know it? And you were in the room when the Prime Minister refused to answer something in the order of 20 questions on that.
Well, look, there's no conspiracy, Tony, I'm afraid to tell you. Arthur Sinodinos has taken this decision unilaterally. He has made a previous statement to the Senate. When he goes before the ICAC processes, I'm sure he'll answer all these questions fully and will be vindicated.
Tony Burke, did you give an explanation as to the nature of your 2-hour lunch with Australian Water Holdings, Nick Girolamo and Eddie Obeid Jr. in 2011 when you, in fact, were the federal government water minister?
Yeah, I was the water minister. I have referred to this previously, but I was the water minister. A range of companies involved in the water industry met with me and took me through what they did. That particular company, when I met with them, never asked me to do anything. There were no decisions relevant to them that were in front of me or that I later made. But as a company that was involved in the water industry, it's not surprising that they, like a whole lot of other companies, wanted to meet with the water minister.
Can I just say, Emma, can I just say, I mean, the thing about Tony, we just have to be really careful here, Tony. I mean, you went to Eddie Obeid's Perisher Ski Lodge in 200004 and 2006.
Yeah, Josh, Josh, really clever. No, if you're on the back foot, try to throw some mud.
Who's throwing mud? It only appeared on the register in 2013.
It was never required to be on the register.
So why did you put it there?
Mate, I've had members of the Liberal Party say to me where they've had different homes, and they've said, you can stay at my place at different points. I've had some of your colleagues make similar offers. I'd been in Parliament with the man at the time that there was no investigations. I was said, when you're in Perisher, if the family's not using it, you can. On 2 occasions I did, and that's all been public for a very long time, and no one has ever alleged that I was asked to do anything or followed through in any way.
So let's move on. The government's been making a lot of noise about slashing red tape this week. Josh Frydenberg, you made reference to it yourself just then with Repeal Day, as it was dubbed by you, and yet some are labelling it as a stunt. Was there anything out of the ordinary here, Josh Frydenberg? Don't all governments, as a matter of course, repeal redundant legislation every year?
Well, there are two different issues here. One is the repealing of redundant regulations that have stayed on the statute books for decades and decades of being no use. For example, regulations that prescribe payment in pennies and pounds. Well, we've cleaned up the statute books with them. But we've also made a number of significant changes to reduce the overall compliance burden. Take, for example, the Brotherhood of St Lawrence. They operate a very important Commonwealth education program called HIPPY, which provides support for disadvantaged families to help get their kids to school. Well, currently they report to the Federal Education Department on a monthly basis in absolute detail. We've said you no longer need to report on a monthly basis, you can report on a quarterly basis. That saves the Brotherhood of St Lawrence $500,000 every year to go about their job of providing services most in need. One-stop shop environmental approvals, overlapping duplicative processes between different federal agencies to give petroleum licences, work that we've been doing with the Personal Property Security Register to release the burden on small hire firms having to register every good that they rent out for more than 90 days. Ensuring, for example, that the classification of films, Emma, when it comes in 2D, 3D, DVD and Blu-ray, doesn't need to go through 4 separate classification processes. We now say 1. Requiring job service providers no longer to have to keep 336 cabinets full of paper records, allowing them to keep those records electronically online. All these measures together will save more than $700 million for both the businesses and the not-for-profit sector. That's a real positive impact on the community. I think we've started a fantastic conversation with the Australian people. We've set up a website. We're allowing people to go online and tell us where the problems are, and more importantly, we are doing what previous governments have never done. We're acting on this red tape a reduction target, and we're making real progress.
Yeah, well, you've set up a website. Extraordinary. I mean, there's 3 sorts of things here. Look, they'll be in there, and we're going through them regulation by regulation. There'll be some examples of sensible reform, and we'll support them. Most of what is in there is redundant legislation. And it's like getting excited that, you know, we vacuumed the spare room that nobody ever walked into anyway.
But hold on a minute, what does it say about your former government that there were 10-odd thousand pieces of legislation that didn't need to be there?
Oh, we repealed more than 16,000 legislative instruments ourselves. This happens routinely through government. There's nothing. The thing that's changed is this time when they vacuum the spare room, they put out a media release, they stand next to the Prime Minister and they set up a website and get excited as though there's something massive that's changed. But the third thing, and this is where it was sort of in the middle of Josh's list just then, is to claim that what they want to do with environmental approvals is just getting rid of an administrative burden. When you want to hand over, without any further federal check or balance, for example, what Campbell Newman does with the Great Barrier Reef, that's not just some minor administrative decision. That is a major policy shift to say World Heritage decisions aren't going to be dealt with by the Commonwealth, if that's what he's saying's in there. To say, oh, one-stop shop for environmental approvals, if they're going to say there will no longer be federal oversight of what state premiers do, that is a major shift, a major policy issue, and they shouldn't pretend that's just getting rid of a few ticks and crosses here and there.
Can I just say, Emma, Martin Ferguson, a Labor elder and a former cabinet colleague of Tony Burke's, strongly supports our one-stop shops. And in terms of the controversial part of our deregulation initiatives, I look forward to Labor supporting our changes to the
Hold on a minute though, Josh Frydenberg, Martin Ferguson now works for the oil and gas industry, so perhaps there's some other agenda there if he's supporting easier regulatory paths for certain projects. Let's move on because we are running out of time. Part of the red tape cutting involves the financial advice changes,
Sure.
Josh Frydenberg. On the issue of commissions, Labor leader Bill Shorten says your financial advice changes will, quote, guarantee another financial collapse the likes of Storm Financial. There is that risk, isn't there, that when you blur the lines between advisor and salesman, commission-driven salesman, that the consumer really stands to lose, don't they?
Well, there's a few points to make here. Firstly, we need to get the balance right between risk and cost, because you can always try to eliminate all chances of risk at huge costs to the consumer, and that is counterproductive in the long term. The second thing is our initiatives, our reforms, we took to the election and they've been endorsed by a lot of people in that sector. The third point is in terms of the best interest duty, well, those protections are currently there in the Corporations Law in section 961G and 961J of the Corporations Law, which prevent conflicts of interest, and that's a really important point. What Labor introduced was a catch-all provision, which even the Law Council of Australia, Emma, said was just too much. It needed to be more tightly defined. We have done that, and we believe it's not mutually exclusive to protect the consumer, but to also ensure that the costs for financial planners are not exorbitant.
A response, Tony Burke?
The commissions are back if they get away with this. The commissions are back, and that means that you end up people taking a hit to their retirement income. That's the outcome that comes from this. And the other thing that happens is they know that the regulations would be disallowed in the Senate, and therefore run the risk that in the course of 6 months we're going to end up with 3 different systems in the name of getting rid of red tape. It's a crazy way to proceed.
What do you mean?
Well, you've got the current laws, they change them, it gets disallowed, they then have another go in the new Senate. That's the pathway that we're going down at the moment, and that can't be in the interest even of the industry, let alone consumers.
We're out of time, gentlemen. Thank you both very much.
Thanks, Emma.
Good to chat.